She-Hulk is probably the #1 card I would get from the track. If you could only pick one card from the track, it would be She-Hulk. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another Marvel Snap video. Today what I have for you is I'm going to be breaking down, in my opinion, what I would buy if I was just starting from Pool 3, the cards I would buy to, start my collection. Like, if I was just starting Pool 3, I'm going to go through Pool 3, Pool 4, Pool 5, talking about cards that are good to spend your tokens on, cards that are good to get your monthly free stuff from, and cards that are just cards you, kind of just have to get from the track. So starting off, I think the best way I can describe the tier list is it's going to be broken down to, this card is really good early because it fits in multiple decks. This card is really good early because you can build a deck around it. Or it's, a good finishing touch card. And we'll kind of get into that. And I'll explain the thought process as we go on. But so in the top row, strong and flexible cards, these are just cards that can fit into a lot of different archetypes and are just generally useful. When you kind of don't have, a good card to do an effect, these are just, good replacements that are pretty consistent. For instance, the Hood is really strong and goes into a lot of different decks. She-Hulk, same way. Really strong, goes into a lot of different decks. She-Hulk is probably the #1 card I would get from the track. If you could only pick one card from the track, it would be She-Hulk. Titania, also just really flexible. Maximus is really flexible. Polaris is really flexible. Those are just, really good threes that can go into a lot of decks. And if you're missing stuff, and you're missing kind of just good cards for stats, good cards to dump on the last turn, Polaris and Maximus kind of do that. Sarah is also really useful and really strong. I think you could also put Sarah into you build decks around these category, but I think Sarah is also just generally strong and generally flexible, where I put Sarah in a bunch of different decks. And Magneto and Doom are kind of just the best generic 6-drops at doing different things. Magneto is really useful and Doom is really useful. And if you're just starting Pool 3 and you get one of these cards, you can play it in a lot of different shells that we'll kind of talk about in the you build decks around these shell. So next we have cards that are the enabler cards. You can build a deck around these. When I first got Pool 3, I was hitting Infinite, I think, with, a lot of the ranks I got was with Lockjaw. Lockjaw was really good. And I played Lockjaw with, Magneto and Doom, because Lockjaw was, a build-around enabler. I could build a deck around Lockjaw, and it was solid. Which is kind of why you need, some of these cards to make a deck. I will say, in this category right now, I think that Cerebro is in a pretty terrible spot. I think Patriot is kind of good, but kind of expensive on wild cards. Quinjet just got nerfed, so I'm not sure how Quinjet's going to be. And I think Destroyer is really bad against Shuri. So Cerebro, I think, is in a bad spot. Patriot's kind of okay, but the just straight Patriot Zoo deck, I don't think is very good. I think the Patriot Surfer deck is good, but you probably can't afford that if you're just starting Pool 3. I think Destroyer is also a great card. I love Destroyer. I played a lot of Destroyer, especially on this channel. But Destroyer is really terrible into Shuri. So if the Shuri meta continues, Destroyer is probably not a good pickup, but you can build your deck around Destroyer. And if you're not really playing a lot of Shuri when you're just getting into Pool 3, if you're not really playing Shuri, Destroyer is a good pickup. Wave enables a lot of different strategies. Wave is a really useful card in a lot of situations. I love Wave. I've played a lot of Wave. Wave is really, really good, really, really useful. Lockjaw for the same reason. It's kind of a casino card, but if you just have a couple of 1-drops Lockjaw and big 6-drops, you'll just win games. You just have to snap profitably. When you have Lockjaw, snap. When you don't, retreat. You can win cubes off of that. And that's what I did. That's what I started Pool 3 doing. Mr. Negative and Electro are cards you can both build decks around early, but I think they are harder to make work than some of these other effects. You can just play Wave on 3 into a bigger 6-drop than your opponent, or soak with a She-Hulk on turn 5 and play 2 cards with Wave, and that's already a pretty good deck. If your deck strategy is play Wave on 5, play She-Hulk and one other big card, you're already in a pretty good spot because you're just playing 2 cards instead of 1 on your opponent on the last turn of the game, which is really important. But Mr. Negative and Electro, they kind of need a lot of support to make better. I just had the first Mr. Negative deck I ever liked, and I am collection level 3000 because I had Bast. It took me a long time to get Mr. Negative, and he was in a really bad spot before because of Leech, but nonetheless, he's still a card you can build your deck around. Same with Electro, but they just need a little bit more support than other cards. I think Quinjet's a really good card, even though he still got nerfed, just because the Devil Dino deck that you have is a pretty natural deck you've played from Pool 2. And, you can win a lot of cubes with the Devil Dino deck, with just, Sentinels and Collectors and stuff like that. That deck with Pool 3 and just Quinjet is very playable. And I think if I started Pool 3 now, from scratch and I was trying to hit Infinite, I would play Quinjet Dino. And I would probably be pretty happy about that. Next, we have cards that I would say are useful in multiple decks, but are less strong than the strong and flexible cards. But they are very good in a lot of different strategies. So, Mystique is really useful in a lot of strategies and can be generally flexible. She's great in Mr. Negative. She's great with Dinos. She's great with, a lot of random stuff. I think Mystique has probably gotten worse the longer Marvel Snap's been played. I think she was generally considered, a better card before. But I still think Mystique's really good. And she's, pretty hard to interact with compared to some of the other cards that aren't really being played anymore. Like, people really don't play Enchantress anymore, which I think makes Mystique good. People do play Cosmo, which you have to be careful of. Next, I have Daredevil. I love Daredevil. I've played Daredevil in a bunch of decks. Daredevil is really useful, and you can end up designing like a lot of really strong decks around Daredevil because like there's just no other effect like it. Like it's kind of just better than Kang in a lot of instances where Daredevil just gives you information and doesn't really like waste your time. I think Daredevil is really good and is very fitting if you want to play like controlling, disruptive types of decks. Like Daredevil Professor X is a combo I played that got me like a lot of cubes when I was just starting out in pool 3. Daredevil Professor X was really good, and that's a really cheap combo you can play early. Next is Coulson. Since Coulson's been downgraded to Series 3, I think Coulson's actually a really strong card. Coulson, again, fits into the Dino deck, amongst other stuff, and with Quinjet, I think Coulson is really powerful. Coulson, you do kind of need other cards to make good. Like a 3-drop that gives you a 4 and a 5 is like already pretty good because it kind of like fills your curve and it gives you above stats. But if you have any other enabler with Coulson becomes really powerful. Like if you have Quinjet, Coulson becomes substantially more powerful, which is kind of like what all of these cards are themed around, where like they need less support, but if they have any support enabler, they become really strong. It's similar to like Death, which is the next card we'll talk about. So like Death is like pretty good. Like Deathwave is a really, really cheap deck. Galactus isn't really a cheap deck, but like since it's a Perma Series 5 card and you're more likely to spend tokens on Perma Series 5 cards now, like Death is a really solid pickup. Death was a huge pickup for my account when I got her. Because like Squirrel Girl is an early pool card. You'll have your pool 1, pool 2. And then you have Killmonger, which is also pool 1, pool 2. And Squirrel Girl, Killmonger, Wave, which is, 2 like at least pool 2 cards. Like you have these cards. And then one other pool 3 card with Death makes a really strong combo. Like Wave Death is really good. If you don't have She-Hulk, but you have Death, like if you have either or, you can make a really strong deck around that with just Moon Girl. And that's like, that's already the fundamentals of the deck, right? Like you could just have Wave, Death / She-Hulk, and then if you're going for the Death route, you could do like Squirrel Girl, Killmonger. And that's already a really, really good deck. That would be so like super playable. Where I think Death deserves being in this tier. This might be like a surprise one, but I think Death is really strong. And like enabling Death is not very difficult. And there's a lot of strategies I think that are good with Death that just aren't really explored. Next you have Dracula, which again I think is like a very good card, but it's just not powerful enough by itself. But it is flexible and works in a lot of situations. So like Dracula, I actually really like in the Lockjaw decks, and I've played with Dracula in the Lockjaw decks a lot. Because what ends up happening is you have like all of these 6-drops that you don't hit off the Lockjaw, but like are in your hand, and hitting a Dracula is really good against Shang-Chi, which we'll probably play against a lot. And you kind of get to recycle the big card in your hand, and it's not really a disadvantage because Dracula grows. Where I think Dracula is really strong. Also, it's good in discard. It's good in the Zoo decks. The Khazar Zoo deck is actually like really solid, and Dracula like enables that really well. Goose is again like a really versatile card, a very strong disruptive effect that I do think is like good, but like you wouldn't build a deck around Goose. Goose is just like a nice card that like supports your strategy, which is kind of like what all of the cards in this row do. So next, like as you go down this list, it kind of becomes like, okay, this card is good in the right deck, but you're starting to need more cards to support it, which is kind of like the general focus here. So like Black Widow and Colleen Wing, I think are 2 examples of cards that are really good as like a 1/2. Like if you have any payoff for Black Widow's really good. Like if you have Darkhawk, just playing Black Widow in your deck makes Black Widow a lot better because it already disrupts your opponent's draw, which is good. But when you like benefit off of that in some way, it becomes very powerful. Like if you can Black Widow wave your opponent or something like that, that's also like pretty good. Even though that's like less likely, but still. Colleen Wing, same reason. Like Colleen Wing into Storm is like already a pretty good effect. And you could like I've seen some decks just playing that as like 1/2s where they play like Iron Fist, Vulture, Miles Morales, Colleen Wing, Swarm. But the point is like Colleen Wing isn't enough. You know what I mean? Like she's just not good enough as a deck by yourself because you have to make like deck building restrictions. You know what I mean? Like you're either not playing 1-drops or you're like ordering your 2-drops in a certain way. Where Colleen Wing is good and very strong in the deck she's played in, but I think she needs more support. Where like Colleen Wing would not be a card I would prioritize because you probably need other cards to make Colleen Wing playable. Same with Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel is like a good card that has a strong effect, but like you need other cards. Like Captain Marvel alone is like a pretty good general card, but her effect isn't strong enough like Doctor Doom to play in each location. Where I think she's worse than some of these other cards, but her effect is strong as like a generalized card. She is also played in the Shuri deck, which is like one of the best decks right now. But like a lot of the cards I'm going to talk about here are like pretty much only good when you have all the other cards in the deck. Like the Shuri deck is kind of a victim of that. Like Red Skull and Taskmaster by themselves are like okay, but they just are like insane in the Shuri deck. Same with Captain Marvel. Like all of these cards are just kind of like okay, but you need a lot of other cards to really start exploiting them. Green Goblin is a card I like a lot. I played a lot of Green Goblin. Green Goblin's just a good card. It's useful in a few different strategies. It's a good card. Mysterio also just a good card. Synergizes with Bishop really well. Very unique effect. Very hard to replace. You don't really need a ton of cards to support Mysterio that well. Like you can do it with just like Nova, Killmonger. Mysterio's pretty good. Carnage, Mysterio, Eat the Clone, pretty good. Viper, pretty good. Mysterio's a very strong effect that synergizes with a lot of cards, and it's very useful to get more out of Mysterio than just his base body, because he just plays at each location, which means you have a lot of random versatility. Psylocke is like one of the only good ramp enablers early. So if you have other cards and you just want to ramp into something early, like on turn 4, like Mr. Negative, like Sandman, like something like that, Psylocke's a one-of-a-kind effect that's very useful. Psylocke is not a deck by itself, but Psylocke is like one of the best cards you can still play if you're trying to ramp into something. Rockslide is kind of just like a randomly good card where like Rockslide is actually like pretty good with Saba and pretty good with Quinjet, just because like it's a good statted card that has a really negative effect for your opponent, which can be very useful. Red Skull and Taskmaster are like a really strong card in the Shuri deck, and I understand they're like some of the best cards right now, but like they're just not that good by themselves. Like a Red Skull by itself is not that impressive. A Taskmaster by itself is not that impressive. They are both disruptible unless your opponent's playing like Cosmo, Armor, Shuri. Shuri is the problem in this deck, in my opinion. I actually don't think they're that good by themselves. They become very powerful when they have the right support, but by themselves, I just think they're kind of underwhelming. So that's why they're on the tier list. But like again, like if you're just like starting in pool 3 and you're thinking about what card you want to get with your free card, like I wouldn't say you should get Red Skull or Taskmaster. You want to like get some of the cards off of the track that are good in Red Skull Taskmaster and then evolve into that. Wong, I think, is in a pretty bad space right now when the best decks are playing Cosmo pretty consistently. Wong is also like one of the most disruptible cards in the game. Wong does not do a good job of winning you cubes because most of the time if your opponent can't beat Wong, they just retreat and you only get 1 cube. Where like Wong is a very strong effect, but I don't really think it's good for climbing. I think it's very linear, and I think like Wong decks are like not that strong right now. Counterable very easily, not good cube equity. Really strong effect, but also like I do think you also need support. Like you also need Doctor Doom, or you need like White Tiger or something to make Wong good. I'm kind of about it. I'm pretty high on Spider-Man lately and Dr. Octopus. These are both like just good disruptive cards that have a very unique effect. Also randomly both good in Galactus. But like Spider-Man, I've been playing a lot of in the like Kingpin like locked down deck I recently was playing on stream, and I'm kind of high on Spider-Man. Spider-Man is also like very good with Absorbing Man. Very just like random useful card that will just gain you a lot of cubes. Like just locking out your opponent is really good at gaining you cubes, where I kind of put this card a little bit higher. Where like if you don't have a lot of cards and you just have Spider-Man, Spider-Man's like kind of almost just a useful card. Because you can just play like Storm Spider-Man and you'll probably just win cubes because your opponents like can't play it anywhere else. Dr. Octopus is really useful for, you know, like randomly grabbing cards from your opponent's hands. It's great disruption. If you have Shuri, Darkhawk is really good. If you have, you know, like Doctor Strange, you know, Dr. Octopus, Doctor Strange has been kind of useful before. And it can kind of just disrupt your opponent. Like a random Darkhawk is really good. Like seeing random Darkhawk of Agent Coulson is kind of insane. Where I feel like Darkhawk is actually like a pretty good pickup. And now as we kind of get to the bottom here, these are cards that are like really useful in the right deck, but like the whole deck needs to be built around these cards. Where like you can't just get these with your one free pool 3 card. You need to have already had a bunch of these cards. So like Beast, Armanzola, Brood, Falcon are like all cards that are really good at enabling certain things, but you need a bunch of cards to enable them. Like Beast is one of my favorite cards right now. It's great in the Beast bounce deck, but like you need all of the cards in the bounce deck for Beast to be good, or it's so much worse. Like if you don't have Hood, if you don't have Darkhawk, if you don't have Bast, like Beast just becomes so much worse. Where he's not bad, but like you need all of these cards to make Beast good. Like Beast, you can't really cut corners with. You need Beast to be picking up the most efficient stuff, and you need a lot of cards where Beast individually isn't that good. Same with Armanzola, where like you need to be hitting this big card with Armanzola, or it's terrible. And Armanzola is really disruptible, where it's kind of why I rated Wong lower, is because you need like Armanzola to not be disrupted, and you need to hit a really good payoff off of it, where like your whole deck has to involve Armanzola as like the last card, or like the whole deck just like Armanzola is the plan B. Like if you just Armanzola your like I don't know what's a 5-cost card, like Armanzola Iron Man probably won't win you enough games where it's worth it. You need to like have like this is a dedicated strategy to use Armanzola, and I'm exploiting all of this other stuff like Null throughout the game to make Armanzola good, where it's kind of tough. Brood is maybe a card you could rate higher, but Brood is like kind of one of the best random support cards. Like, Brood is really good with Patriot, it's really good with Cerebro, and it's really good with Silver Surfer. But other than that, Brood is terrible. So, like, Brood is the best card at kind of, like, cheaply enabling a bunch of stats into a lane because it's only 3 energy, and it makes 3 bodies, which is good with Patriot, and it's good with Silver Surfer, and it's good with Cerebro because all of them benefit from the Broodlings. But, like, if you're not doing, like, one of those strategy, Brood is kind of just terrible. Like, it's actually just really bad. Where I put Brood really low, because, like, Brood is, like, one of the best enablers from that deck that I don't really think you can cut it from those decks, because it's just such a high power level card. But Brood is, like, close to one of the last cards you want to pick up from that deck, or it's just not good. Falcon is really similar to Beast, because it just picks up all those 1-drops, where, like, Falcon needs to be, like, one of the last cards you're picking up from the deck, or it's not good. Hazmat, you need a bunch of cards to make Hazmat good, and then Hazmat isn't even that good, where I think it's, like, it is powerful in the right decks. Like, Hazmat is a card you can build around, but you need Luke Cage, you need Viper, you need Rocks, you need Debris. Like, you need a lot of stuff to make Hazmat good. And then it's, like, only kind of okay, also, and not, like, super competitive, where I don't think Hazmat is a card I would recommend picking up. Hela, I really don't like Hela, but other people have success with Hela, which is why I'm putting her higher up here. But, like, again, your whole deck has to be built around playing Hela. Like, every card is built to play around Hela. Like, you play Death in this wave with Lady Sif just to, like, not discard Hela. So, like, it is a really strong effect, but, like, every card in your deck needs to be built around Hela, which can be very expensive and involve a lot of pull 3 and pull 4 cards that you might not have if you only get to choose one. I think Juggernaut is, like, surprisingly underrated, but Juggernaut is definitely not, like, a core card. I think Juggernaut is, like, good in Disruptive Shells, but the thing with Disruptive Shells and, like, control decks in general, I think is control decks have a really hard time subbing out cards, because the effects they rely on tend to be one of a kind. Where, like, if you don't have the right tools to support Juggernaut, I think Juggernaut isn't very good. Also, Juggernaut can just, like, accidentally kind of screw you over of some games, which is why I think, again, you need, like, very specific things in play for Juggernaut to be useful, or he's just, like, becoming a coin flip. Rescue, I think, is really good in, like, 2 decks, but in the decks Rescue's really good in, she's one of the best 4-drops, because she's just 4 stats for 9 power, or 4 energy for 9 power, which is very useful. Thor, also, very strong 3-drop if you are guaranteed to draw Mjolnir. So if you have Jane Foster and if you have Lockjaw, Thor becomes really strong, but, like, you need all of those other cards, so, like, there's no reason to play Thor. Like, Thor becomes a 3/10 on the right deck, but you don't really want to draw Mjolnir as just, like, one of your draws, because, like, you're spending 2 cards to make a 10-statted thing, which just isn't that good, unless you have, like, some kind of payoff for it. So, like, tucking it into Lockjaw and having Lockjaw flip up another thing is very good. Having Jane Foster just draw it automatically is very good. Where, like, Thor is a really strong effect, but you like, need a bunch of other cards to make Thor really powerful. Zero is actually the first card I ever got from Pool 3 off of the track, and Zero isn't bad. But again, it's the kind of deal where, like, Zero is really useful in some decks, but otherwise you would just never play Zero. Like, a 1/3 that mutes your card is just not worth it, unless you are really muting something specific that you need to target, where, like, Zero is, like, one of the finishing touches on the deck. You know what I mean? Like, Zero is, like, the finishing trim. Where Zero is not the first card you get, and Zero is not the first card you establish something with. Because I literally got Zero as my first Pool 3 card, and I couldn't play it for, like, another 1,000 collection levels. So I would not play Zero. Luke Cage, admittedly, I do not have yet, but I think Luke Cage is in a really similar boat to Hazmat, where, like, Luke Cage, to be good, you need a lot of cards to support it, and you can't really cut quarters on that, otherwise it's just not very powerful, where Luke Cage becomes a lot worse. Deadpool is, like, not that good, but if you want to build a Deadpool deck, just because, like, you don't draw Deadpool consistently, which is why it isn't good. Like, it is a strong effect, but you don't draw Deadpool consistently, which is the problem with it. This is, like, you can pick this up if it's literally, like, the last card you need for your deck. That's this whole tier. Like, same with Deadpool, same with Debris. Debris isn't really a good effect unless it's, like, the last card you need to build the junk deck. Deadpool isn't a good deck unless you really want to build the Deadpool deck. Like, you shouldn't pick up Deadpool unless Deadpool is, like, I want to build the Deadpool deck. I don't care how good it is, but I want to build a Deadpool deck. Then you pick up Deadpool last. Deadpool is bottom priority. Same with Gambit. Gambit is, like, good in the discard deck, kind of good with Wong, but Gambit is not a card you prioritize. A 3/1 that discards a card to destroy something random is not good enough. You would pick that up last. If you want to play that in a deck, it is the last card you pick up. Ghost Rider. I think you could rate Ghost Rider a little bit higher. I might be a little too hard on Ghost Rider. Ghost Rider actually, like, can be decent. You, again, kind of need, like, good support for Ghost Rider. Maybe I'm wrong about Ghost Rider. You could put Ghost Rider higher. I think Ghost Rider is probably a little bit better. But, so Ghost Rider is actually not bad. I'll give Ghost Rider a little bit more credit. Ghost Rider might be, like, here or here. Where like Ghost Rider's pretty good, but you need to build other stuff around it. Jane Foster is a card that is literally only good in the Lockjaw Thor deck. It is bad pretty much everywhere else, and you are drawing Wasp and Mjolnir off of it. That is the only real play this card has ever seen. Where I think it is like, again, like the last card you have for this deck, along with Thor. Where like Thor, if you don't have Jane Foster, is like still kind of okay. Jane Foster, if you don't have Thor and you don't have Wasp, is just bad. Where Jane is like the last card for that reason. Magic is a really strong effect, but you need a really good reason to play this card. Where Magic is like one of the last cards you need for this deck. And I know this because Magic I just got. It's like one of the last 7 Series 3 cards I got. And Magic is really good in Mr. Negative. But like I needed literally every other card in the Mr. Negative deck for Magic to become playable. Mojo is a really strong effect if you have the right support for it. Same with Typhoid Mary. Same with Venom. Same with Viper. Where these cards are like good in certain strategies, but until you have the other cards to enable them, they're not very good, where they're like the finishing touch on the deck. They're that like chef's kiss. Viper, same thing. 2-3 is like not good enough. It needs to kick back something meaningful. And the cards that meaningfully kick something back are other pool 3 cards, which makes it hard to get. Absorbing Man used to be a lot better. It's a lot worse now because of the Zabu nerf, where I think like all of these effects are just like situationally good, and you need like other cards to support them, which is again why they're like, this is like the last card you should pick up if you're getting it from the token shop. If you're not like specifically, I have the whole deck except this one card, you shouldn't pick up any of these cards. And then finally, these cards are all terrible pretty much, or like severely underpowered. You should not buy any of these cards from the shop. You should be getting these from the collection level tier as just like a card you have to get, but they're not that good. Like none of these cards are really worth talking about. Arrow is the only card I didn't assign because Arrow just got nerfed and it's a pretty huge nerf. So I don't feel comfortable recommending Arrow changes until more things shape up. But so this is the tier list for pool 3, and we're going to move on to pool 4. Really quick, I'm just going to throw it out there. I think this tier list is like a lot less debatable than some of the other stuff. The reason these cards are down here, Negasonic just came out, and I don't have her, so I don't know where I rate her. Kitty Pryde isn't out yet at the time of making this, so I'm not going to rate Kitty Pryde because she hasn't been played. M'Baku, Atuma, and Orca are all actually cards I've rated as bad in the other tier list. Or not like bad, but like you just have to get them from the collection track. They're not worth picking up. And they're also not pool 4 and pool 5 cards anymore, but since it's fairly recent, it has been updated. So the best cards to spend your tokens on are the Series 5 Perma Big Bads. And specifically Galactus and Thanos are way better than Kang, because Galactus and Thanos enable a style of deck that you literally can't do without the deck. Kang is just like randomly a good card in some deck. Kang like kind of fits into a bunch of cards and probably gets you some cube equity. But since the Perma Big Bad, you can pick up Kang and it's a good use of your tokens because it's not going to get cheaper. But Galactus and Thanos are way better pickups in my opinion because they enable a totally different style of deck that you can't get from anything else, and they're not downgrading. So if you spend your tokens on these, it's probably a good investment if you ever want to play with these cards. And again, like you can't replicate that style of deck. Kang is just another big bad, but Kang is like worse than the other 4 cards you'll see. Like Kang is worse than Shuri, Kang is worse than Bass, Kang is worse than Darkhawk, and Kang is worse than MODOK, in my opinion. Valkyrie, it's debatable. But Kang is good because it's a perma big bad, which is why Kang is S tier. Shuri is like the best pool 4 card, hands down. It is not debatable. Shuri is insane. Shuri is the best deck in the game right now. Shuri has dodged getting nerfed. So I'm going to be honest with you. Shuri might be a little sus to pick up because I think Shuri's probably going to get nerfed again at some point. We'll see how the metagame shifts up. But Shuri is like by far consistently been one of the best cards to pick up from pool 4. It is such a great use of your tokens. Shuri is incredibly powerful. It's one of the best decks. You will gain a lot of cubes with it. It is proven to be good at this point. Your only worry about Shuri is really that she'll get nerfed. The reason I put all of these other cards, by the way, below Shuri is because like there is just no other pool 4 card as strong as Shuri. I like some of the other cards underneath. I play with them more, but Shuri is just better. Like Shuri is the best deck. You know what I mean? Like it's not really comparable in my opinion. Again, that's just my opinion. Where like you have the permanent big bats and then you have the best pool 4 card in my opinion, which is why it's S tier to A tier, because that's just how I think your token should be spent if you're starting fresh. But you know. Bast, Darkhawk are 2 really awesome cards that enable a lot of interesting strategies that you can't really replicate. I think these are really good pickups to get in pool 4, because if you're going to spend tokens on a card, I think it should be a strong effect that enables a different style of deck. Bast and Darkhawk do that really well. I really like playing with these cards. They're really fun, and I know that's subjective, but I do think it's worth saying. I think Valkyrie and MODOK are also 2 really good cards that have consistently been kind of proven to enable a deck. MODOK is kind of a weird card to pick up because it was a season pass card. But if you missed out on MODOK, like MODOK is pretty consistently played in the discard deck. And honestly, like playing a discard deck without MODOK nowadays just doesn't feel very powerful. Where MODOK is like consistently played in the discard archetype. The discard archetype is kind of fringe playable. It just doesn't get the numbers that like other decks get, which is part of the issue. But MODOK is great in that deck. It's like the perfect power level season pass card in my opinion. It's a great card if you have the season pass. If not, it's still really good. Like it's good if you want to play the discard deck. Valkyrie also enables a bunch of different styles of decks. I think Valkyrie is currently better than some of the cards here, but it's debatable. I think Valkyrie is kind of a tough decision. I think the tough decision is basically like these 4 cards are better than these 2. And Master Mold just came out, but Master Mold's really only playable in one style of deck. Black Panther is playable in some types of deck, but it's very narrow, and those decks are like kind of fringe playable and not very good, where Black Panther isn't really seeing consistent play at all. Null is like an amazing card in Galactus and in like some weird destroy decks, but like it's one of the best cards in Galactus, which sees a ton of play. Like Galactus is the popular deck that people play and people know, but like other than Galactus, it's not very good. So like if you have Galactus, you can play Null, but like Null doesn't really see play in destroy very often now. Now that Null was changed to work with Mr. Negative, it might see more play, but like I think Valkyrie has pretty consistently seen more play than Null. Outside of just like the one deck Null has always played in, which is Galactus. Silver Surfer actually got nerfed, where Silver Surfer's kind of in a weird spot. Silver Surfer was really unplayable in the Leech Thanos meta, but Silver Surfer has started to see a lot more play. So I could very easily see Silver Surfer jumping up a tier. If you like this style of effect, if you like Silver Surfer's effect, it's seeing a lot more play recently, where it's looking like it's going to be more powerful, but it just hasn't been out long enough, and the decks haven't really been created and tested long enough where I can confidently say it's worth it. Zabu, since it's been nerfed, is like good in some decks, but not the powerhouse it used to be. But Zabu is definitely very good. It is better than Black Panther. It is better than Master Mold. The order I would pick up cards, honestly, out of this list is like MODOK if you want to play the discard deck. But again, like the pool 4 cards kind of start to get more fringe playable. Like I think Darkhawk is the best card after Shuri. I think then it's Bast. I think then it's MODOK. And like then it's probably Silver Surfer and Valkyrie, but like Null specifically if you want to play Galactus, it gets kind of complicated. I don't think you should buy any of these cards from the Pool 4 shop. I think you could maybe buy Black Panther if you really want to play the Black Panther decks. I think you could maybe buy Master Mold if you want to play Ronin. These cards are like technically like playable, but I think they're very fringe playable, which is kind of why they're down. Like these 2 are here. They're not as bad as these, but like these 4 cards actually see play. These 2 cards really don't see that much play. These cards you should not pick up by any means. These cards are not good. Dazzler's not good. Ghost is not good. Nimrod is terrible. Sauron is terrible. Sauron is just like worse than the better Shuri deck right now. Sentry I think is really cool, but just not very playable. Shaman King is bad. Shauna is bad. I have Shauna. I had Shauna since she was pool 5 and she is not good. Stature is like actually kind of interesting, but Stature is just not playable right now because she just doesn't put out big enough numbers. But I could see a metagame where Stature actually shapes up. I think Stature is significantly better than like all the other cards here. Super Scroll also not good. But yeah, that is my buyer's guide / tier list ramblings. I hope you guys enjoyed. Sunday's kind of a weird day for videos where I try to do something like variety every now and then. So I hope you all enjoyed. I hope this was useful to some of you, or at least fun. It's just fun talking about Marvel Snap cards for me. But I hope to see you all tomorrow, and I hope you all have a great day. To see you all for another Marvel Snap video.